Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching today's presentation of Beyond the Microphone. My name is Matt. I do a whole bunch of podcasts. I've been podcasting now for about 9 years. My day job is at a company called Castos.com. We're a podcast hosting company, do everything for podcasters, including helping you distribute your shows to Apple, Google, Spotify, and private podcasting for anybody who's interested in doing like a members only podcast or a paid for podcast. We'll go into some examples towards the end. If Dina has some questions, I can do some show and tell. And I have a ton of resources available to you. The best place to go, which I have mistakenly not put a slide in for, is academy.castos.com. Let me just see if I can do this on the fly. Can I do this here on the fly? So it's academy.castos.com. Let me just put that in there. Done. Does that show up? It should show up right there. So it's academy.castos.com. Look, there's a million places to go to get how-to content on setting up the technicalities of a podcast. Those are not interesting to me. Getting technical stuff set up for podcasting is fairly straightforward. It's fairly easy, and there's a ton of information, including at academy.castos.com. So check that out. We're going to talk a lot about mindset. We're going to talk about process. We're going to talk about creativity, as I think a lot of people watching this stream are generally creatives, artists in their own right. And, you know, approaching a podcast can probably be overwhelming for those of us who critically think about the fine details of our art. And I'm going to try to say, let's throw that out. let's get a little bit looser with our podcast. And the number one thing that a lot of people get hung up on, as I mentioned, is the technicalities of podcasts is, boy, I got to get an expensive microphone. You don't need an expensive microphone. So let's just get past that, right? A lot of people get stuck in looking at the hardware, looking at the microphones, looking at the lighting, all of this stuff. And yes, it's important, but it's not important in the beginning. It's certainly not important to the story and to the content that you're creating. Yeah, it marginally makes a show better, but we don't have to get stuck on getting an expensive microphone. The idea is to get started today. Avoid overthinking it. A lot of us sort of get paralysis by analysis. We're starting to look and listen and research what the best approach is to starting a podcast. And the best thing for you to do, like getting into running or any kind of repetitive exercise, is just get out there and start doing it. Get started today. Start recording immediately. If the only device you have is your cell phone, your iPhone, record on that, and just get through the process of talking to yourself, talking to a microphone in your closet, in a room, or wherever you're recording your podcast. Don't overthink it. We'll talk about some of the tactics around this, but you don't have to let fear hold you back from getting your podcast started. The best way I've approached it, now I've been podcasting for about 9 years, start small, say more with less. Now I do a host of podcasts. I produce 4 podcasts. I'm an executive producer on another podcast. One of the podcasts that I do is just a 5-minute, no more than 5-minute podcast every week. And that limitation allows me to, number one, get it done. And number two, it really serves a particular audience. The audience knows what to expect. And I think in the early days, a lot of us, when we start a podcast, we look at what the popular shows that are out there. We say, well, boy, some of the most popular shows are like 2-3 hours long, or these highly produced shows by by a huge production company like NPR. Start small. Don't worry so much about the length of the show and how it's produced. And you'll find yourself being a lot more satisfied with the outcome. One of the things that a lot of people say is, well, nobody's going to listen to me when I put this content out there. That is very far from the truth. The question isn't how do you get this audience, but what will you do with the audience once you have it? So long as you stick with doing a podcast, you will get publishing a podcast, you will get an audience over time. And what will you do with them once you have them? Embrace the rough edges. This is, and again, many people who are artists, who are creating art, you might understand that, look, everything isn't going to be perfect. And once we can get beyond that, especially with audio, the better you will be as a creator in this space. Now, I remember going back and starting my very first podcast and just literally editing out every little sound, every little that happens in the audio. It's a draining task to do something like that. And if you're not getting paid for this work, and sound engineering isn't the most critical thing on the list, like you're not doing a nonfiction, or excuse me, like a fiction storytelling piece where sound design is very critical, then you don't have to get so finite with your editing, and just embrace the fact that, hey, there's some background noise. I mean, as long as it's not overwhelming, but hey, there's some background noise. I'm recording in a coffee shop. I'm recording in a busy co-working space. It's okay. It sort of adds to that ambiance. And the idea here is, don't get stuck with all of that editing that so many people can get stuck in. Avoid comparing someone's episode 300 with your number 3. And a lot of us, I know I can speak for myself, we find a new show and like, wow, we want to produce a show like that. I want to produce a show like NPR does or like Wandry does, but these are massive operations with many people and many producers and editors, storytellers, writers, researchers behind the scenes that we never see, hear, or get reaction from. We only hear the host. And it's very easy to get lost in looking at somebody else's production or the way they host or the way they interview somebody, and just say, I want to be like that. Why can't I produce something like that? We're all just getting started with this stuff. I don't know. I've published over 600 episodes of stuff, and I'm learning every single day, and I am certainly not the best. And I continue to learn from other people and other show hosts and other shows every single day. This is important. Do it because you love it. Because if you don't love it, if you don't love the idea of speaking into a microphone and sort of having this sort of intimate vehicle to reach, one person, 10 people, 1,000 people, then podcasting can become another one of those tasks you simply don't want to complete. And it becomes one of those things that you continue to push to the sidelines and look at as a daunting thing that you have to accomplish. Do it because you love it. You love creating content. You love getting better each episode, even if it's 1% better. You love exploring and interviewing people, that kind of thing. I think from a lot of people who start, especially if you're looking at, how do I get more people to my business? How do I get more eyeballs on my project? How do I engage a different audience? A lot of people can look at it as like, oh, it's this marketing task. It's this sales funnel, right, that I have to approach and do. It's just another thing. I do podcasting because I love it. And the residual is, oh, by the way, people find me, or I make a connection, or I sell a product, or somebody hires me to do something. The return on investment, as a lot of marketing and businessy folks like to say with podcasting, is definitely there, which is not the most scientific answer, but it's there, and it comes in many forms and fashions that are very hard to measure. Let me switch over to the next set. So that's sort of like the creative mindset. Now we'll walk into the more structural, I guess, mindset or way you should approach your podcast. Prepare for the long game, right? I've been doing it now for 8 to 9 years. It takes a lot of time to build up an audience, and you have to be satisfied with the fact that when you launch, well, maybe it's just your mom that's listening, and that's okay, or your best friend, but then, or a couple coworkers or something like that. But eventually, through hard work and effort and some of the other things we'll talk about, in a moment, the audience grows. And the best thing about a podcast, as somebody who is, if you're trying to grow that audience and get connected, is these are folks that are taking audio with you everywhere in ways that you've never imagined, right? So I listen to podcasts in the shower, when I'm running, when I'm driving, when I'm cleaning the dishes. This is the most intimate way, most portable way to really build a digital relationship with an audience. It just takes time. It eventually takes time. And through promotion and stuff like that, which we'll talk about, you'll grow that audience and things will get a lot better. Have a measurable goal. Everyone says this, have a goal with everything, right? With podcasting, it's easy to just look at the numbers and just say, well, I'm looking at the downloads that I'm getting from my podcast. I'm looking at, how many people listen to the show, or where they're listening to the show from. A better measurable goal is something like an email list. That's my favorite measurable goal. Because at the end of the day, when you're looking at what is most valuable about the audience that you're growing, it's how you can get that audience to take action, or sell something, or get people to go to an event, or get people to raise money for a cause or an organization or some awareness thing. And email is going to be the thing, at least the way that I look at it, as that vehicle to instantly message somebody. So they listen to you every week, every month, whatever your podcast comes out. But the most immediate way to measure the most engaged of those listeners, so look at your email list. My favorite thing to use or tool to use is MailChimp at MailChimp.com. Not only because it's free, but it has some pretty powerful features in there for building email campaigns and things like that. But you can insert your favorite, I know there's many of them, you can insert your favorite newsletter platform. MailChimp just seems to be the easiest and most affordable for me. And I'm able to measure that goal, because in a podcast, you're saying something like a call to action. Every time you start a podcast episode, you might say something like, hey, don't forget to jump on the newsletter at, whatever, southcoast.fm/subscribe. And then from there, you're actually seeing how many people are engaged. You use that as your bellwether to say whether or not your show is successful in your eyes. This is a big one. Think in seasons. It's okay to take a break. This is something that, as you get into the throes of podcasting, it does take time. It takes time to produce it. It takes time to edit it. It takes time to promote it, publish and promote. If you do a lot of interview shows like I do, there's a whole other level of logistics, like scheduling people and getting them on the call and getting them prepared to perform on your show, if you will. And it ends up being a lot of work. I don't have that. I don't have it in this presentation. But if you go to one of my podcasts, southcoast.fm, there's a podcast guide over there, and it's about 8 hours an episode, right? If you looked at your time investment from start to finish, it's about 8 hours an episode. Like if you're doing an interview show, you got to find somebody to interview. You got to email them, maybe go back and forth and scheduling that time. Then you get on the call, a little bit of prep with your new guest that you're about to explore a conversation with, and then you record the episode, right? So maybe another hour. So we're already up to a couple hours. Then you're editing. That's another couple hours. Then you're maybe writing a show description or a blog post that goes along with it, or that email newsletter that goes out promoting the show. Now you've invested another few hours, and then before you know it, you're promoting it, you're getting it out on Facebook, you're repurposing some of this content, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Your average episode might take you a good 6 to 8 solid hours of investment. So you can quickly get burned out depending on what else you're doing. And I like to think of it in seasons. Have a break, take a break. It's okay to take a break. Look at it from a 8 to 10 to 12 episode season. And that's how you approach, your new podcast, especially if it's in the beginning. Think of what your premise is going to be, approach it in a setting that says, you know what, there'll be a start and there'll be a finish. And then I will reflect on that season and reinvest my time and energy in the next season. That's the best approach I've found. for new podcasters and seasoned podcasters alike. Sort of on the same point. The first 12 are fun and the next 12 suck. This is what I found as a podcaster. Even when I launch a new project, this 5-minute show that I was referencing before, I was like, this is a great idea. This is 5 minutes. It's going to take me, 5 minutes to record it, a few minutes to edit it and produce it. Like, I can do this. And I was so excited for the first 12 episodes because I was doing something new and fun and fresh. And now I'm like, oh God, this is back to the grind again. This is tough. Understanding that these sort of peaks and valleys, roller coaster ride, whatever you want to insert there, it's going to hit you. And many of you know this as maybe creatives, is that things can get exciting and then you want to breathe new, you get a little tired of it and then you want to breathe new life into it. Again, this goes back to the seasonality thing. Give yourself a point to pause, reflect, and then recreate with your podcast show, because it can get pretty daunting, depending on, where you're at with your creative podcast. Stick to the premise of your show or not. Everyone should kind of focus on the premise of a show, like especially if you're looking at podcasting as the vehicle to break into a new market and to find an audience. You really want to get hyper focused on who this audience, what this podcast serves, and who that audience really is. It's very difficult to just say, well, I'm going to do a show on art reviews or a tech review podcast. Very difficult to just be the generalist in a world where there's over, at this point, 4 million podcasts. Not all of them being active, but 4 million registered podcasts. Maybe a quarter of them are really, really active. By active, I mean at least one episode a month. Really get hyper focused on who this is going to serve. Let me go back to that 5-minute podcast. It is a 5-minute podcast on WordPress news, right? This is a very, very finite group of people who are very interested in what's happening with the software that is WordPress. And that is why I create that show. It's for a hyper-targeted audience. They know what they're going to get. I know what I need to produce, and I move on. Same thing with southcoast.fm. It's just for entrepreneurs in the South Coast area. Even that is pretty general, but it's still encapsulated by targeted just on the South Coast. I'm not going to interview, somebody from Boston to that degree. Okay. Stick to the premise of your show. And I say, or not, because give yourself the freedom to change it. If you're not happy with it as you progress, certainly give yourself the freedom to change. It's okay to change. In fact, I changed the cover art intentionally. And the cover art in the scope of my primary podcast, MattReport.com, at least once a year. At least once a year, I'm changing that cover art and the premise, just so I don't get bored of it. This is primarily the main reason. Time management, promotion versus creation. Now we're going to get a little bit deeper into the nitty gritty of podcasting tactics on like a per episode basis. So time management, huge thing. Like I said before, depending on what you're doing with your other marketing, your other creative, if this is not just the hobby for you, how are you going to find the time to edit, promote, and continue to create your podcast with everything else that you're doing? At Castos, where I'm employed, we are a podcast hosting company. So all I do is talk to new podcasters almost every single day. And the biggest question I'll ask is, how many episodes a month do you want to get out? What's the most episodes that you can do? What's on your mind? What are you thinking? A lot of people might say, I think I can do 4 episodes a month, 1 episode a week, your weekly episode of podcasts. And that's awesome. How many hours do you have left to promote that podcast after you've already crunched in 1 episode a week? And many of them will turn to me and say, oh, I don't have any time left to do any of that other stuff. I can just simply get by with 4 episodes a month. Throw that idea out and literally pare it down to 2 episodes a month. or one a month, and spend the rest of your time promoting that single podcast or 2 podcast episodes throughout the rest of the month. If you're starting with no audience, like if you don't have a following on Instagram or an existing email newsletter or a YouTube channel, it's going to be very difficult to grow that audience by just producing it, publishing it, and then you move on to the next one. You want to get really intentional on promoting it and getting it out there. So find a balance between promotion and creation with the podcast. It will pay off greatly in the long run. Go everywhere podcast RSS feeds are accepted. Your podcast host generally helps you with this stuff, like we do at Castos. We'll help you get it into iTunes, Spotify, Google, Amazon, all of the major distribution platforms. They're all free, by the way. If anyone ever turned to you and said you had to pay for it, then I'd run in the opposite direction. But go wherever RSS podcasts are accepted. This is an evolving space, evolving rapidly. Podcasting is fairly old in technical terms. I mean, it's like 20 years old in technology, which is like 2,000 years old, but still it's a very a new space in an uncontrolled space at this point. And that's why it really hasn't, I don't know, let's say taken off like a YouTube or an Instagram, because it is open. It's an open standard. It's open for anyone to do to produce and to publish. There's not one controlling entity yet, though Spotify and Apple are trying as hard as they possibly can. So get your podcast RSS feed out wherever podcast feeds are accepted. If you are somebody who listens to podcasts now, and maybe you already have started a podcast, a very popular site these days is Podchaser, Podchaser, podchaser.com. Check that out. And with every episode or season, or again, no rules, but just something to think of, survey, engage, and involve your listener. Okay, this is another great way to not only grow the audience, but to find out what the audience wants. Everything you do with your podcast, I'll say, should be 50% for you and 50% for your audience. Some people will say 90% for your audience and 10% for you, but you're creating it largely because you enjoy this and you want to get the stuff out, but also listen first or second to your audience. And the best way to do this is to survey, engage, and involve the listener. So surveys, very easy, right? These are things that you can kind of set up on autopilot, especially if you use something like a MailChimp or Typeform. There's tons of like surveying tools. SurveyMonkey is another one. Setting up small little surveys, sending it out to your audience every quarter, every 90 days, every month, whatever you want, every episode, doesn't matter. But surveying them and asking them the questions are, is this the content you want, or is there something I can do better? And just have that going. When you get into those creative ruts, it's a great way to lean on. It's a great source to lean on and say, look, this is what my audience wants. I know because they've been telling me, all along. Engaging an audience. Again, podcasting is one of the difficulties of it is engaging. It's not like a live stream. So how do you engage your audience either during a show or after a show? You have to be involved in social media, or you have to look at your podcast as a multi-channel approach and do things like, okay, I publish 2 episodes a month through my podcast, but every month I do 1 live stream. And you do a live stream and you do it on Facebook or YouTube or wherever. And that's where you start to engage your audience, and you're chatting with them. You're asking them to pick their favorite episodes, really get them involved as much as you can in the beginning and forever, and involve the listener. Because I've been doing a lot of stuff in the WordPress space for so long with my podcast, I usually take the August off. So August into September, I'll take off. No podcast episodes are going out, but I'll get some of the best, most engaged audience people to send me small little audio clips. And I use that as sort of like a mashup, where people are contributing their audio snippets, sort of like a call-in show, if you think back to traditional radio, and just involve them in different ways that makes them feel appreciated. And it is also a great way to serve content for you. So survey, engage, and involve listeners as much as you can, however you define it, as long as you're thinking about it for the long-term success. Podcast as the cornerstone content of all your efforts. I'm biased. I know. I work at a podcast hosting company. I love podcasts, but podcasts can be the cornerstone content of everything you do. So if you're a business owner, small business owner, you're trying to get this word out of whatever it is that you're doing, think about it this way. If you record one 30-minute, 45-minute long interview with somebody in your industry, somebody that you work with, whatever it is, you can then take that. So not only is that an episode, right? We have a 45-minute episode, right? That's your podcast episode. But you can then pull out many, many areas of extra content from that one single episode. So you could turn that one episode into 3 blog posts. You could turn it into 3 newsletters. You can certainly pull out quotes to use on your Instagram. You can pull out little video clips and make what's called audiograms and share that on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, LinkedIn. You can take that one 45-minute conversation and break it apart throughout the entire month to cover your content calendar. So there's no excuses to not make content when you're investing at least 1 hour a month to creating a podcast. Leveraging blogs and transcripts. This is just pulling a piece of that cornerstone content concept, but leveraging blog posts and transcripts is massive, right? Massive. If you're looking to get more search traffic to your website, if you're looking for people to read and learn more about you or look at you as an authority in a particular subject, again, you are having conversations with people. If you continue to do podcasting for 6 months, a year, you then turn back after a year and say, oh my God, look at this archive of content that I've created. I can pull so many stories, so many lessons, so much stuff from this, and it's already there for me. Like I don't have to think about the pieces that I have to go and get. So you leverage that, you turn them into blog posts, which are searchable in Google and other search engines, and transcripts. Transcripts are probably the lowest hanging fruit that you can do is transcribing your podcast episodes. Not only is it great for search, but it's great for accessibility. People who are hearing impaired or using screen readers or don't have accessible podcast listening devices, you're allowing them to engage with your content without having to listen to the audio, and that's extremely important. I could beat this dead horse. That's a terrible phrase. I could go on and on about email marketing forever. Encourage and invest in email marketing because again, it is the easiest. I say easiest, air quotes. It's the easiest goal to measure. You can literally see the numbers go up when you have different call to actions, when you encourage people to join, when you're giving value, extra value or added value to your show through your email list. I can't stress it enough. I would build an email list out of everything that I'm doing. Even if you walk away today, like I'm not starting a podcast, I would still start an email list and to start really encouraging that from the get-go. Very powerful. Audio and video, the tale of 2 birds and a stone. So I say podcasting can be the cornerstone, but the cornerstone could also be video, which then is turned into audio, which is then turned into blog posts and email newsletters and social media posts. But you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone in either direction. You can take your audio episodes and upload them to YouTube. YouTube is, I think, the most popular music listening app, even before Spotify, largely just because of the reach that they have and the size of the platform. And a lot of people sort of are coy to that concept because like, well, you're not going to see anything. You're going to see a logo and it's just going to be audio playing. Yes, that's exactly what it's going to be, but you're giving somebody the chance to listen to audio on a video platform. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no rules against it. And I would certainly do that. Now, if you can sweeten the pot and do more video work around your podcast, the more you can do, the more you'll grow that audience. This is also something that ties back to video, audiograms and quotes for visual audio media, right? So audiograms are, and if you already listen to podcasts, depending on which podcast app that you use, some of these apps will actually create audiograms for you. So Overcast does it, Castro does it. At Castos, we have audiograms built into the platform, so you can actually create a little movable waveform. So you'll see the transcript of the person talking. You'll see the words on the screen. You'll see like the waveform bouncing up and down. You can play with different templates and designs. You can put photos on it. And basically what you're allowing yourself to do is create these moments where visually people can engage with your podcast. But two, you're highlighting areas of a podcast that you can really punch into, like the most exciting parts of a podcast, and get it out in a 15, 30-second, 1-minute clip to share on social media, because that's what's going to allow new listeners to discover the best parts of your show. Remember, people won't listen to every single episode, every minute of every episode, but when you're creating these types of videos, you're allowing those new listeners, potential new listeners, to punch in a moment that they never would have explored before. So audiograms and quotes, super powerful. There's a new kid on the block called social audio. Let me take a sip. I really dislike social audio. Let me tell you why. So like Instagram stories, like I'm not a big Instagram stories advocate, largely because in the areas that I work in and create content in, it's not very valuable for me anyway. But I know for like food, fashion, music, there's a whole range of like visual stuff in areas where Instagram stories really does a great job. But for a podcaster and somebody who wants to create content that's everlasting, I don't like the concept of content that disappears. So social audio, there was a pretty big jump earlier this year with an app called Clubhouse. Twitter Spaces is a product that Twitter still is working on. I think Facebook's coming out with one because Facebook just copies everybody. But social audio is, your Instagram stories, but for audio to a degree. You're basically live streaming audio, and then it's kind of gone. Sure, I guess you could work around it and record it and try to keep it. But again, one of the most powerful things for me as a podcaster is when you create that content, it's yours. It's archivable. People can go back. They can listen to it. They can find it in their podcast apps. They can find it on your website. Oh, you wrote a blog post summarizing it. I can always go back and read it. 10 years from now, somebody's searching on Google can find it. It's just way more valuable to record, archive, search, and expand upon an individual podcast episode than literally audio that just disappears after you stop the room, as they call it in Clubhouse, or the stage, something like that. So if you've heard about social audio, it's a fantastic way to engage an audience, but it just disappears after it's gone. So for me, the experience isn't as great. This is a pretty big topic, monetizing. So now we'll move into how do you make money as a podcaster? How can podcasts make money? And again, this is very early stages. We've seen only this year, Apple and Spotify really take this stuff a little bit more serious. But I'll digress into big platforms monetizing content off the backs of creators. So to monetize or not to monetize, again, we go back to what's the goal of this podcast, right? Do you want to make money? Is this the mission? Is this the goal? Are you trying to become somebody who is hosting a show where you're selling advertisements or having sponsors, or however you want to monetize it? Do you want to do that? If it's nowhere near, don't even think about it. Don't even think about wasting your time trying to monetize the show, because it is very hard in the larger grand scheme of things to, you need a lot of listeners. You need a lot of listeners for big advertisers to even pay attention to you. And there's a ways around it. And you have to decide, do you want to do ads or do you want to do sponsors? And there's a difference, at least in my eyes, and maybe in the podcasting world. So there's places like podcorn.com, podcorn.com, like popcorn, but Podcorn. And this is an advertising network. They're not the only ones. There's a million of them. Well, maybe not a million, but there's a lot. And these are places where you can upload your show or upload the criteria and the demographics and your listenership of your show. And advertisers will literally pay you pennies on the listener. So I think at minimum, you might need to have 500 to 1,000 listeners where you might make $10. So it's very difficult when you get into the big advertising spaces because they just want to see big number counts. Or you join something like a podcast network where you're part of like a cohort of other creators and they do the ad deals for all of these shows and you get a little chunk of it, right? Something like that. Sponsors, at least in our eyes and in most of the podcasters' eyes, this is a direct relationship that you have. And this is where you might have to put on your sales hat and do some cold outreaching and knock on somebody's door and say, hey, look, I'm creating content. I'm interviewing people. I'm reporting on the news of whatever, of this particular industry, of this particular vertical. And I think you should sponsor the show because there's great synergy there. Your customers might be here. Your brand should support this kind of initiative. And that's where, again, no rules. You can charge whatever you want. That's how I do sponsorship on my podcast. I will sell direct ads. I will find the best fit, and I will just come up with the terms. And as a creator, it's a great balance to be able to set those terms, set those fees. You just have to go out and sell it. That's the challenge. You just have to be ready to go out and sell it. But advertisers in the podcast world, there's plenty of places you can just literally put your link in and see who will buy it. But you might be doing like a podcast on like paleo muffins, and all of a sudden like Pringles is advertising on your show. Like, you don't have control in these big ad networks, whereas a direct sponsorship sale, you might. Donations and membership content. Again, this is no different. You can simply set up a donation link where people are sending you money literally on PayPal or Venmo, right? Or, any place that is going to give you a donation or take that transaction. At Castos, we have a concept loosely called private podcasting right now, where you can create a private podcast. And basically all that means is it's a podcast that's not meant to be distributed out to the entire world. And if you want to have people who give you whatever dollar amount you want, $9 a month, $99 a year, $1,000 a year, $1,000 a month, doesn't matter. You set the terms. You can publish audio to just those people who have either exchanged money with you, or maybe you just set it up as a free. You just give me your email address and I'll send you this podcast content. And that's member content or private content, member only content. This is actually really big, which is not in this presentation. This got really popular where I work because of COVID and because so many people work from home. And the whole world went from 0 to 60 with Zoom and video conferencing in like 90 days, that everyone got burned out from being on video 24/7, wall to wall on their calendar. So we had a lot of companies turn to us and say, what can we do with audio? But we only want it for our company. We don't want people to be downloading it on iTunes. So private podcasting is something that we do at Castos, but it's a huge concept now for companies who are working in this, I hate to say new world, but they're giving options to their employees. Like, hey, look, we understand that if you're working from home now permanently, you don't want to be wall to wall with a camera on your face every day, and we don't want it either. So what we'll do is we'll just create those meetings, those company town halls, the CEO town halls, which are very famous, and we'll just publish it in a podcast, and you listen to it this week, and then that's it. You get the content, and maybe we'll meet about it. But we're seeing a lot of companies now even create podcasts for their own departments, marketing, sales, production, engineering, that kind of thing. And that's how they're holding meetings for the long term. Go for a walk, get out of the house, go exercise or something like that, and listen to this podcast for the company. So members only podcast, private podcast. Merchandise and affiliates. A lot of the stuff is no-brainer stuff with monetizing a podcast. You can do it however you want. You can create merchandise. You can create, that's very popular too. Or you can do affiliate sales. I do all of these things because, like everything else, you can't just have one channel that's just going to bring in all the money. Not that there's a lot of money in this stuff in the early days, but you try to do everything. You try to do the sponsorship, direction, the donation direction, and you can do some merchandise and affiliates. It's, if you can work with local people to create merchandise, that's amazing. There's online companies like printful.com, which will go out and produce t-shirt or print t-shirts and drop ship t-shirts and hats for you and all this kind of merchandise. That's great. And affiliate deals. Affiliates have been cracked down a lot more. Like Amazon changed a lot of their rules. Affiliate marketing and all this stuff is a whole different ballgame. But you can certainly find brands that will do affiliate deals with you. Somebody clicks a button and you make a little commission when they buy the product. So as we go into the final phase of this exciting presentation, we'll talk about what I would do today to get everything up and running. And I'm searching for the microphone I thought I had in here to show you. I would invest anywhere between whatever you're comfortable with, but I would say maximum $100 to $500 on equipment for your podcast. Now, you can buy a really great microphone called the ATR 2100. You can find it on Amazon for $90, $80. It is literally the best investment you will ever make for your digital content marketing career. And I'm going to tell you why in a moment. One, because it plugs into USB. This microphone, ridiculously expensive. Dina knows because she had to buy 2 of them for the podcast room. And it wasn't just the microphone. It was all the other accessories that you have to get in order to put all of this stuff and make it all work. A microphone like this is like $400. This little thing here is like $90. Then it plugs into all this other stuff, which costs another few $100s. You don't need all of it. You can get a nice $100 microphone. You can get a nice webcam to record yourself, get yourself a nice light so that when you're producing the video content and Zoom stuff, a lot of people now are forced to get a little bit better at this stuff. But that's what I would set aside for a budget if I were starting today. $100 on at least the USB microphone, ATR 2100 USB. I would start with a solo show, right? If you're a business, you're creating things, you're selling widgets, you have people walk into your store, you're a restaurant, whatever it is, whatever you're doing, I would start with a solo show. Answer your frequently asked questions. That's it. That's how I would start. Because quite literally, if you just answered all of the questions, frequently asked questions that your customers ask you, even if you gave up on podcasting, which I hope you don't do, but even if you gave up on podcasting, you at least have 12 shows where you've answered all of the top questions that you normally get. So at least you can repurpose this podcast to answer questions for people if you gave up on it in the future. But if you continue to do it, I would then graduate to doing something like an interview show once you're ready. That's the most popular thing to do. Get a guest on the show, interview them. It's a great way to, meet new people, build a network, build content, and to get their audience or their customers to share your content. So that's how I would gradually start it. $100 to $500 if you're willing to spend that much. Start small. Just answer questions that people ask you. 5-10 minute episodes, and then slowly graduate into a full-on maybe interview show. Why I say you should invest in at least that microphone is number one. I think one of the best ways, even if you said, you know what, I'm not going to start this podcast thing, but I'll happily join somebody else's podcast. Other podcasters like myself want you to be prepared at least with a decent microphone. Throw out, I'm looking for it. I don't have them here, but these are wireless headphones. Don't use wireless headphones on a podcast interview. For all that is holy in the podcasting world, if you're going to join a podcast, at least have that $80 to $90 microphone. You're going to make the podcast host a lot better, and at the end of the day, people are going to be able to hear you a lot better when they're on that when they're listening to that podcast. You want to come out as your best self, representation of your brand, of your business. Spend a little money, spend a little time making yourself sound good, but get booked on other shows. Fantastic way to grow your audience. You might be rolling your eyes, but if you can find other podcasts in your space, guarantee you, it's a great way to exercise the podcasting side of what you want to do, but also grow your business. Invest in areas that you can optimize. This is kind of a vague one, but there's plenty of things that you can do in the space to just get automated or just get things off your plate once you get to understand it. So, if this becomes a thing for you and the podcast is really rocking and rolling and, you're building an audience with it, don't be the one who's editing it too, unless you really love it, for whatever reason. But as soon as you get to a certain point where you just want to show up, record, send that editing off to somebody else, right? Get a production team to just produce it for you and edit it and upload it for you. Get all that out of the way. If you're doing an interview show, I spend a lot of time with a producer that helps me for my podcast, and she will go out and do a pre-interview and a screening of the guest who wants to be on the show. I'm lucky enough where I've been doing it for a while now, where people are requesting to be on the podcast. A lot of people request to be on the podcast, and I just have to make sure that they have a great story to tell. I don't want somebody just joining to promote their thing. I want them to have a great lesson for the audience that I've worked so hard to retain over the last 9 years. So get people to help you with pre-screening or producing or show note writing. Get those areas really cleaned up when you can. A little bit of a vague one, but as you mature in the space, it'll pay off. And ultimately, find time to reflect on where you're going with your podcast. Take those breaks. Take the moments to change and to optimize and to create a new story arc or create a new season. And it's okay to find an end to a podcast. It's okay. Like if you just run, if you look at television, you look at television, your favorite episodes or shows that have ended, and you're like, oh man, why did it end? But that's part of the experience. I mean, but so famous, like a show that I like, I don't know if everyone likes it, but like The Sopranos, it ended with an ending that just people still can't figure it out today. Like 20 years later, people are like, I don't even really know how it ended. And it keeps there's some attachment to it, but it's also nice that it didn't keep going for Law and Order. How long has Law and Order been on? I mean, it's been I don't know. I'm 40 years old. I feel like it's been going on since I was 6. So I don't know, 34 years. I feel like it would just end it. It's okay to end it and to find some finality in your podcast process. Allows you to get it into a new project, which, if you're an artist, you kind of probably already know that. That is all I have for you. Sign up if you want to start a podcast. Sign up at Castos.com. I'm the director of podcaster success there. We can help you start your podcast and get it out to the world. I'm going to go back to this stage. Tons of resources like the hardware, the microphones, the software you should use. There's a lot of information out in the world for that. But I have all of those checklists and downloads at academy.castos.com. if you just want to dive into the more technical software, hardware side of things. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. That was great. I know we had Laura join us in the beginning,
Cool.
but we can open it up for a few minutes to any questions if Laura has any. I have a brief question. I was just wondering, I know I've been in a few of your other workshops, but so people tend to get their first questions are about equipment and like the technicalities of starting a podcast. So we can go to Academy, this website here, to kind of see what's there to offer to start. But have you seen from like zero to starting the podcast, does it seem to be easy once people like get their equipment and get rolling, or can you really get stuck in the technical portion of it?
So, you know, the difference of, let's say, this microphone is 20% better than the $90 microphone, right? So this is like a $400 microphone plus all the other stuff to set it up, ends up being like $600 to $700. Does it sound that much better than the $90 microphone? Not really.
Yeah.
Not really. If you've been doing it for a while and you are trying to push the needle beyond, maybe you have some competitors in the podcast space like I do, and there's other podcasts that people want to listen to aside from mine. So I have to just push it a little bit further to stay ahead. But at the end of the day, it's a marginal difference. You know, I do it just to stay a little bit ahead, but it's not going to be this dramatic difference.
Yeah.
You know, and I wouldn't go all in. Where you can really get lost is the editing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's going to take a certain muscle over time to really identify how to just be a better, I don't even want to say speaker because I can barely speak English as it is, but like just like you have to understand as a podcast host, ask the question, let the guest answer, stay out of the way as much as you possibly can, and try not to get tripped up, you know, with your own, you know, thoughts while you're having the show. That's what's really going to start to make it a chore, you know, in the long run.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
I can show real quick. Let me just pull it up. So there's tools like there's an app called Descript, Descript, Descript. You can find it at descript.com. One second while it's pulling up. This is a new tool. Well, new. I've been using it now for about almost a year, but they're constantly improving it. For whatever reason, it's having a hard time opening. And Descript will allow you to edit. It automatically transcribes your show, which is great. So you input the audio, it turns all the audio into text, which is fantastic. And then you can identify who's speaking. So you tell it, if you do an interview show and it's just you and somebody else, you say, oh, there's two speakers here. And then it'll identify the two speakers. And then it allows you to edit the podcast through text. So,
oh, cool.
So this is what it looks like. But you can see on the lower half of the screen, the waveform area. This is what you traditionally, you know, if you use a free program like, I don't know, GarageBand on Mac or Audacity on Windows, which also runs on Mac, you're generally editing with the waveform. You know, you're listening to the podcast, you're searching the waveform for any kind of breaks, or pauses, or maybe somebody started sneezing hysterically, right? You're trying to find it and identify it. With Descript, you'll see up top, it transcribes the entire show, and you can simply select lines of text, and that'll automatically select the lines of text in the waveform, and you can literally just delete this line, and that'll delete it from the waveform. So you can find those moments by just reading, which will allow you to much, much more efficiently edit a podcast. And it has a fantastic tool called, it just removes the filler words. So it'll scan the entire file for all of these words. I don't know if people can see it, but it says things like, kind of, I suppose, right, so, I mean, and it'll automatically find all that stuff and remove it from your audio. So all the ums, the ahs,
wow, that's
everything
pretty
that
cool.
people, don't want to hear, it'll take it out. If you ever wanted to dislike yourself as a speaker, you start to see how many filler words you use, and you're like, oh boy. But it's a trade-off. Like, you could literally remove everything, but then it's going to it's going to cut that stuff out. So you could get into a scenario where you just remove everything and it just sounds really choppy because it's taking out all of those words. I only take out the and I mean, because I say I mean a lot. And that's where I stop it. The other words I can deal with.
Cool. That's a good trick. Awesome. Well, I don't have any other questions. I don't know if anyone else does, but that was really thorough. I kept having questions and then you would answer them. So
yeah, there's a lot to it. The technical stuff, that it would be like a 3-hour long presentation, and largely a lot of that stuff can be found, and I already teach a lot of that on the Academy site. Mindset, expectation, game plan is generally what I like to cover.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we will see you soon.